The academy smelled like sweat and old canvas. Ceiling fans turned slowly overhead. Outside, the city buzzed. In here, 14 men stood very still. A young American stood at the edge of the mat, decorated tournament fighter, U.S. Air Force veteran, a man who had broken bones and won championships and never once questioned what he knew about fighting. He was about to question everything, because across that mat, an old man in a white gi was looking at him the way a surgeon looks at an X-ray. Not with aggression, not with anger, with something far more dangerous: certainty. Chuck Norris was 27 years old. He had discovered Tang Soo Do in Korea during his Air Force service and turned it into a religion. He trained with the kind of discipline most men only dream about: early mornings, late nights, relentless repetition until the techniques were no longer techniques, but instinct. Back home in the United States, people were starting to talk about him. Tournament circuits whispered his name. He was fast. He was precise. He was hungry. But hunger doesn't care about your trophies. And in Brazil, there was a man who had been feeding on hungry young fighters for 40 years. His name was Hélio Gracie, 60 years old, 155 pounds, a man who looked like he belonged in a library, not on a mat. But Hélio Gracie had built something in Brazil that had nothing to do with size and everything to do with truth. He had taken the Japanese jiu-jitsu his brother Carlos brought home from the docks of Rio and rebuilt it from the ground up, stripped out everything that required strength, everything that required youth, everything that required physical dominance. What remained was something else entirely: leverage, position, patience. He called it Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, and for 4 decades he had been proving, against big men, strong men, famous men, that it worked. He had gone 40 minutes with Masahiko Kimura, one of the greatest judoka who ever lived. He had fought in the streets. He had accepted challenges from wrestlers, capoeira fighters, boxers. He had never stopped believing that the ground was the great equalizer, that standing up was a privilege the other man could take away, and that karate, for all its beauty, was a game played in a world that didn't always cooperate. Chuck Norris had come to Brazil curious, a man hungry to learn, to see what existed beyond the borders of what he knew. He had heard of the Gracies, he respected them. He had not yet understood them. The visit had begun with tea and courtesy. Norris watched the students drill. Helio observed from the side, occasionally correcting a grip, adjusting a hip angle with one quiet touch. The translator moved between them. The atmosphere was respectful. Then someone asked the question, "Mr. Helio, what do you think of karate?" The room shifted, slightly, imperceptibly. Hélio Gracie zipped up from his students. He was quiet for a moment, not thinking. He had thought about this for decades, just choosing his words. "Karate is beautiful," he said, "like ballet. But on the ground, a karate man lasts 2 minutes, maybe less." Silence. The students along the walls went absolutely still. The translator related. Chuck Norris was the words. He didn't flinch, didn't raise his voice, didn't argue. That was the thing about Norris. Even as a young man, he had a stillness to him, a capacity to absorb pressure without showing it. But inside, something had shifted, because he understood what had just happened. He hadn't been insulted with anger. He had been dismissed with calm. The way a chess grandmaster might tell a beginner they'll lose in 12 moves, not out of cruelty, but because it's simply true. Norris was a proud man. He had earned that pride with years of sacrifice, tournaments, training, blood on the floor. "Would you like to see?" he said. The translator related. Hélio Gracie looked at him for a long moment. Then he smiled. "I was hoping you would ask."
They faced each other. Norris settled into his stance, clean, angled, the posture of a competition fighter. Hands up, weight balanced, the kind of form that had made him a champion. Hélio Gracie stood like a man waiting for a bus. No performance, no drama. Feet shoulder-width apart, eyes calm. An old man in a gi who looked faintly bored. The students watched from the edges. No one made a sound. Norris moved first. A jab, clean, fast, the kind of strike that had ended fights in American tournaments from coast to coast. Helio slipped it. Not dramatically, not with a shout or a counter. He moved his head 2 inches, the exact minimum required, and let the punch travel past his ear like a slow train. He was inside Norris's range before the American had reset. Then it happened. Fast. Helio's hands found collar and sleeve. One weight shift. One pivot. The world rotated. Chuck Norris, 27 years old, peak condition, multiple-time tournament champion, was on his back. He didn't know how. That was the first lesson. Helio settled into side control. No wasted energy, no showmanship. Just weight, perfectly distributed, impossibly heavy for a man his size. Norris bucked. Tried to bridge, tried to roll. Nothing worked. Every movement created an opening. Every escape attempt burned energy. The old man on top of him barely seemed to be working at all, just adjusting, shifting, closing every door the moment it appeared. 30 seconds in, Norris was breathing hard. 60 seconds, his arms felt heavy. 90 seconds, Helio moved to mount. Slow, deliberate. The arm came up. Like a man making a point. The armbar was there. Everyone in the room could see it. Helio had it locked, the angle perfect, the leverage complete. He didn't finish it. He held it. And looked at Chuck Norris. The message didn't need a translator. It could end here. Norris tapped. 1 minute, 53 seconds.
Helio rose from the mat the way a man gets up from a comfortable chair. Not triumphant, not loud, just done. He offered Norris his hand. Norris took it. There are men who would have walked out of that room and sealed it away forever. Pride is a powerful thing. Humiliation in front of witnesses can close a mind permanently, turn it hard and defensive and blind. Chuck Norris was not that kind of man. He sat on the mat for a long moment, caught his breath, and then he did something that would define everything that came after. "Show me what you did," he said. "Slowly. Show me." The students on the walls exchanged looks. Hélio Gracie studied the young American for a moment. Then he nodded. They drilled for 2 hours. Those 14 men would describe it later as one of the strangest, most memorable things they had ever witnessed, a decorated champion asking to be rebuilt by the man who had just broken him. No argument, no ego, just hunger, turned in a new direction. Word traveled, the way word always travels in small worlds. Within the Gracie Academy, it became a quiet teaching story. Not a boast. Hélio Gracie was not a boastful man, but a demonstration. An example pointed at every student who thought standing skill was enough. "This is why the ground matters," he would reportedly tell students. The best striker in America, the ground took him in under 2 minutes. Never stand. When you can choose. The footage was never released. There was no footage. Just 14 men. And a memory that refused to fade.
Hélio Gracie died in 2009. He was 95 years old. He trained until weeks before the end. In his later years, journalists would ask him what made Gracie Jiu-Jitsu different. He would always give a version of the same answer. "I was a sick child, weak lungs. The doctor said I should not fight. Carlos trained and I watched from the side. I could not do what the strong men did, so I had to find another way. I made jiu-jitsu for me, for the weak man, the small man. Everything I built came from limitation. Limitation as invention. Weakness as the source of a revolution." Chuck Norris understood this eventually, not intellectually, but in his body, in his bones, in the muscle memory of 93 seconds on his back with nowhere to go. He went home changed. He spent the following years seeking out grapplers, wrestlers, judokas. He integrated the ground into his training years before most American martial artists knew the Gracies existed. He was evolving, quietly, relentlessly, the way serious fighters always do. And when decades later, a young man named Royce Gracie walked into the first UFC cage and submitted striker after striker in front of a stunned American audience, when the world watched in disbelief as ground fighting dismantled every stand-up art it met. Those who had been paying attention were not shocked. Chuck Norris was not shocked. He had seen it coming since 1967. Since an old man in a white gi had looked at him across a mat in Rio and said, with absolute serenity, "A karate man lasts 2 minutes on the ground, maybe less." The greatest fighters in history share one quality that has nothing to do with physical gifts. It is the willingness to be broken, to be taken apart in front of witnesses, to sit on the mat after a loss, not in a film, not in a tournament, but in the quiet truth of a room with no cameras, and say, "Show me." Chuck Norris said it. Hélio Gracie showed him. And that afternoon in Rio didn't diminish Chuck Norris.